Anthony Joshua isn't normally very good at articulating his thoughts and feelings. He tends to come across as very awkward and a bit cryptic. Now, some might say that it's deliberate, him being cryptic, and that's possible, but you can be cryptic and eloquent at the same time. But Anthony Joshua is neither. However, in this press conference that he did for the Jermaine Franklin fight, I thought AJ came across very well. He articulated himself much more clearly than normal. Now, there was one thing that he said in the press conference that I know a lot of people are jumping on, and I'm not saying they're wrong to, but it's the part where Eddie Hearn asked AJ what his motivation is to continue boxing, and AJ came right out and said money. Some people are going to see that as a red flag because they believe that if a fighter is only in boxing for money, then they're not going to give it 100%. They're not going to give it their all. And when their back is up against the wall, they're going to fold up their tent and go home. They're not going to fight through adversity because, again, they're only in it for the money. They're not really in it for the love of the sport. Well, I think there is some merit to that. But as I said earlier on, AJ isn't the best at articulating his thoughts and feelings. He did better here than he normally does. But that doesn't mean that everything that he said can necessarily be taken at face value. In the United States, fighters tend to be more upfront about their desire to make loads of money and how much of a motivating factor money is in their boxing careers. And with AJ training in Derek James's gym in the United States alongside Errol Spence and Charlo and so on, has some of that candidness about making money rubbed off on him already? I don't know. I'm just putting it out there as a possibility. And of course, when you look at the Errol Spences and the Charlos of the world, just because they are upfront and open about wanting to make loads of money and that being a major motivating factor, that doesn't mean they don't love boxing itself. That doesn't mean they don't enjoy their work and enjoy their job. I mean, you go back to the old days of professional prize fighting in the early part of the 20th century, when you had these fighters coming out of New York and various areas in America, tough environments. Do you think that the main motivating factor that drove the careers of people like Joe Louis, Jack Dempsey, George Foreman, any old school fighter you could think of, Sugar Ray Robinson, Joe Frazier, do you think that the main motivating factor for them taking up boxing was the love of the sport? Because I don't. I think that the guys coming out of these really tough environments where there was very little work in the inner city for certain communities, the main motivator to go into boxing was to make it out of that environment, to create a better life for themselves and for their families. Many of them saw it as the only opportunity. So money has always been a big and an important motivating factor for people that turn to the sport of boxing. Some of the greatest fighters of all time would have been primarily motivated by money. But as I say, you learn or you get to acquire a taste for the sport itself. You learn to love it. You learn to enjoy your work, you see? So with AJ and the comment that he came out with, is he just explaining that money is a motivator, but he also enjoys his work? Or is it what some people are concerned about, where he's actually fallen out of love with the sport of boxing and money is the only motivator? That's a question I can't answer. I guess we will see in due course with AJ's performances, because when somebody really enjoys their work, it does reflect, it does show in their performances. Whereas when someone isn't in love with the game, same thing. AJ has never spoken about what happened in the run-up to that first Andy Ruiz fight, but this press conference here was the closest he's come to doing so, because he alluded to certain things outside of the ring, and he said that you could tell from the way he looked on the ring walk that he wasn't right, that there was something else going on in the background. And that's, of course, something that we as fans all noticed, or most of us noticed it, but AJ hasn't acknowledged it. In fact, Eddie Hearn denied it in the past. When Eddie Hearn did a review of that fight on I think it was either the DAZN or the Matchroom YouTube channel, he was still denying that AJ looked off on that ring walk against Andy Ruiz first time out. But to me, it was as clear as day. To most of us, it was as clear as day. And now we've got Anthony Joshua coming out, apparently confirming that something was wrong with him. Now, I'm not saying that that would have changed the outcome of the fight, but in boxing, there are very small margins of error, particularly at the top level, particularly in the heavyweight division, where one punch really can change the course of a fight, as we saw against Andy Ruiz with AJ. And as far as what was actually wrong with AJ that night, if there was anything wrong with him at all, because fighters, of course, often come up with excuses for losses and poor performances. It's possible that AJ is just telling people what they want to hear. If there's a bunch of people who think that there was something wrong with AJ that night, then, well, he might just step into that and say, okay, yeah, I'm going to say there was something wrong with me so that people don't think so poorly of me, given the fact that I lost, etc. So I'm open to different possibilities. But if there was actually something wrong with Anthony Joshua that night in New York, he, in the press conference, alluded to spreading himself too thinly or spreading his attention too thinly with regards to business interests outside of boxing. He also in the past spoke about family issues. Now, I'm going to assume that AJ has a pretty big extended family in Nigeria in particular. And I don't want to speak out of turn here, but when you come from a culture, a society where many of your family members don't have money, and there are lots of people in Nigeria who have loads of money, but there are also lots of people who are very poor. I don't know what AJ's family is like, but if he has a lot of people in his family who are trying to come up in the world and they're trying to elevate their standard of living and so on and so forth, it wouldn't at all surprise me if there was a scramble for AJ's resources within his family, okay? I'm not saying that is the case. I'm saying it wouldn't surprise me knowing what it's like in some of these countries. And that can be very stressful for the person who has all the money, that so many family members are scrambling to get their resources and there's internal squabbling and bickering within the family and so on. So I guess that's another possibility. But as I said earlier on, the proof is in the pudding. If any of this means anything, if any of this had any impact, negative impact that is, on AJ's performances in the past, we will surely find out now, because he says that this is the first time he's been able to dedicate himself completely to boxing with no distractions in a very long time indeed. He's training in the United States. He's 100% committed. He says he's put all the other stuff aside. So let's see what his performance against Jermaine Franklin is saying. And even still, we won't find out exactly what AJ still has left in the tank potentially, because Jermaine Franklin, even though he performed well against Dylan White, he hasn't shown himself to be an elite heavyweight at this stage. So let's say he goes out there, takes care of Franklin in impressive fashion. That's not like taking care of Tyson Fury in impressive fashion, or Deontay Wilder, or Joe Joyce, or Alexander Usyk, etc., etc. You get what I'm saying? So there will still be questions that need to be answered beyond this. And if he doesn't get the win, if he loses, then perhaps it's curtains. Now, his new trainer, Derek James, didn't want to give too much away, but I was observing the body language between the two, the way Derek James was talking, the things he was saying, and I could be completely wrong here because, again, I'm an outsider looking in, but I sensed that there was a better relationship, maybe a closer relationship, even though they haven't been together long, between Anthony Joshua and Derek James than there was with Anthony Joshua and Robert Garcia. Garcia, in several interviews, seemed to suggest that he wasn't able to communicate directly with Anthony Joshua a lot of the time when he trained him for that Alexander Usyk rematch, that he had to go through intermediaries, which is very disturbing. That's not the sense I get with Derek James, at least not so far. I spoke in several videos after AJ's second defeat to Alexander Usyk about the fact that Robert Garcia was very public about his relationship with Anthony Joshua. And I speculated that maybe AJ didn't like that the guy was a bit of a chatty patty. Maybe AJ wants someone who's going to be a bit more discreet and tight-lipped about what goes on in the gym, so on and so forth. And maybe Derek James has that type of approach. Either he's just naturally that way inclined, or the other possibility is that he's had to sign some contract. He's had to agree to certain stipulations whereby he can't speak too much about what it's like training Anthony Joshua. Again, I'm not saying this is the case. I'm throwing possibilities out there. Now, as far as Jermaine Franklin and how he came across at the press conference, he was very laid back, very reserved. similar to how he was in the run-up to the Dillian Whyte fight. And even after the Dillian Whyte fight, Jermaine Franklin just seems like a very laid-back character, a man of few words. Ironically, he kind of reminds me a little bit of Errol Spence in terms of his demeanor. And I say ironically because Errol Spence is trained by Derek James, right? And obviously AJ is trained by Derek James for this fight. But yeah, Franklin has this laid-back, reserved kind of demeanor, doesn't say too much, just wants to get in the ring and do his talking with his fists. And I can respect that, but it doesn't really give you much to go off. I'm going to say that Franklin, to me, seems like a naturally calm person in the ring, not just outside of the ring. And that, of course, is an asset. But at the same time, he might be one of these guys where he just does enough to get the victory and he doesn't go above and beyond. And maybe that cost him in the Dillian Whyte fight. Maybe if he'd been more active, he would have got the W rather than taking an L. And I know a lot of you guys feel like Jermaine Franklin deserved the W, but I'm sure you would agree he could have done more at certain points. He did allow Dillian Whyte to get back in certain rounds and take certain rounds on his jab and what have you. If he'd been a bit more active, could have gone different. He could have put it beyond dispute where the judges wouldn't have been able to give Dillian Whyte the benefit of the doubt. We talk about how important it is to be relaxed in boxing, and it is very important, but you can be too relaxed. You can be a guy who's a bit lackadaisical. Now, with that being said, Eddie Hearn at the press conference was remarking on how Franklin appears to be lighter than the last time you saw him when he fought Dillian Whyte. And certainly going into the Whyte fight, he had been lighter in the past, and the amount he scaled against Dillian Whyte was heavier than he'd been for previous performances. So if he does come in lighter for AJ, I think that's a good thing, because although he has fast hands, he didn't show himself to have particularly fast feet against Dillian Whyte. And maybe him not stepping on the gas and upping his activity level later on in that contest wasn't just down to a lackadaisical attitude, but also maybe not having the stamina because he hadn't trained as hard, or because carrying the extra weight was sapping his energy, etc., etc. But I guess you could say that the kind of weight he came in at against Dillian Whyte, which was very heavy, is reflective of a lackadaisical attitude in the gym or a lack of discipline when it comes to his eating habits and so on. So for this AJ fight, hopefully his discipline is better, and it should be, because if he beats Anthony Joshua, as everybody was saying at the press conference, his life has changed forever. In fact, his life has probably already changed forever. I don't know what kind of money he's getting for this AJ fight here, but I have to imagine it's going to be by far and away the biggest purse of his career so far. And even if he doesn't win the fight against AJ, if he puts on a good showing, then he's going to get more fights off the back of that. TV companies in the United States even are going to look at him and say, okay, this guy's at least going to come to give it a go and put on a good display. Maybe we want someone like that for one of our heavyweights. You see it. Franklin is no longer in obscurity. He's just faced one of the most high-profile fighters in the heavyweight division. He's now facing maybe the second most high-profile fighter in the heavyweight division in Anthony Joshua. I guess that's arguable at this point. So let's see what Mr. Franklin can do here, whether he can perform better than he did against Dillian Whyte. In terms of how he performed at the press conference, there wasn't really much to go off because he said the bare minimum. Anyway, I'll leave it there. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below about this press conference, about how both guys came across, and how you think the fight is going to go. Are you sick and tired of the mainstream mindset? Does the dogmatic conformity and pathological ignorance have you tearing your hair out in frustration? Then don't be alone. Come and join our brotherhood on Patreon. We stand as a beacon of reason against an army of insanity. You'll gain access to my weekly topical podcast, where we take more deep dives than Jacques Cousteau on an endless variety of subjects. There's also videos, interviews, live Q&As, as well as a vast back catalogue of previous episodes, including my popular Confessions of a Nightclub Bouncer series. You can listen via the Patreon app or download in high-quality MP3. Connect with myself and hundreds of other members in our Element chat group. There's no contract, no commitment. You can cancel at any time, and it's cheaper than a Mickey D's McMuffin. Just head to my Patreon page via the link below this video and select the tier called the Brotherhood of Reason. I'll see you over there.